Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and welcome to the show. And I'm sorry about the audio. I'm sorry about everything. I apologize for everything. Abjectly. I am so serious. Somebody posted on the site that they tried to listen to they said, this podcast has the worst audio. I can't listen. And it wasn't even a guy, it was a woman. It depresses the hell out of me. And my new mic's on the way. Let's hope that that's going to help us. And again, I can't thank you guys enough for tolerating this crap. Oh, and as if that isn't enough, I'm going to have roofers over my head tomorrow. Yeah. I've talked to them and told them, between 10 and 11, if you could, but we'll see. God help us, or whatever. Anyway, good morning. Bree, I don't know how to get the old mic back. He's saying, can you use the old mic? I can't, because you can't imagine how we had to I don't understand any of this, okay? So I'm sorry. Forgive me. Again, abject apologies. I grovel before you in my incompetence and incapacity to do anything, or unwillingness. I don't know. And Gigi, I love you. She just wrote, it's never been that bad, stop worrying. Now, in some respects, each of you is having a different experience, I understand, depending on how you're listening, on what you're listening, your speakers, your this, your that. But the reality is that, technically, this show is I don't know, tin cans and string and bubble gum. But enough. I can't believe August is almost gone, but then that'll get me talking about time, and we don't want to do that. Reading the paper is cruel and unusual punishment. I just want to say that. And while I abjectly apologize to you for many things, I would appreciate your gratitude for the fact that I force myself to keep up on the horror. And it really is something else. I just printed out something that maybe I'll share with you tomorrow while the roofers are banging and crashing overhead. It was a long thing, and I'll have to, cull it. But if I could write, I would have written this thing. And it's well done. And written by a guy that normally, in normal times, I found to be a conservative voice that I would never listen to. And that's how, that also typifies how different things are. That so many of the people that I do now read, because I don't watch or listen a lot, but that I read are people who were Republicans, often conservative Republicans. And I've said that before, but wow, wow. it shows how this is not about politics. It's about our freedom. The very essence of what makes us love our nation. I'm assuming that that we do. I mean, I do. Otherwise, who would care? I wouldn't care what happens. So, I'm just saying. You know who I was thinking about last night? Well, didn't spend a lot of time thinking, but it crossed my mind that one of those very conservative Republicans who I haven't heard from in a long time is Liz Cheney. And I thought about her and then wondered what her life is now. And if there is so much fear amongst those who have taken on, and consequences for those who have criticized, taken on, gone after Trump. What the hell could her life be like? Her threat level. How much her life in every way has been negatively impacted. My heart goes out to her, and I will be forever grateful for what she did, for her courage, and I hope her silence, at least as far as I can tell, is not a result of, true fear, which for her family. That's all I'm saying. Speaking of that, one of the things that I read today, which just boiled my blood, speaking of security and fear, and how these times are not unlike any others in our lifetime in this country. And that is that the Secretary of Defense, that is the position he holds, for which he is wholly unqualified, which was apparent when he was nominated, but has become more so since he took the office. Pete Hegseth. There was an article in the Washington Post about the Army, actually what is called the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, or as it's known by those in the know, the CID, Criminal Investigation Division of the Army. One of its responsibilities is to provide security for top defense officials. Now, I assure you that that is one of many important, genuine security jobs, important to the security of us all. And the people in that department are saying that they have never seen so much manpower deployed for the personal security of any defense secretary, that they are literally, the Washington Post says it talked to over 12 people in the know. And what they got back was, real anger, incredulity at how Hegseth is using this important agency to protect himself. The article actually calls the protection of Hegseth and his family and his families, because you'll recall this is a guy who's been married, divorced, children with this one, children with that one, and there are now people from army people with more important things to do escorting his children in various locations to school and back, protecting his homes, protecting his wife's children with another man, protecting, he's got so much family, it calls it in the article blended by virtue of his infidelity and drinking and spousal abuse. And we are now apparently stretching the CID of this country's army, the Criminal Investigation Division, just to take care of his wives and children and himself. The adjectives used in the article are sprawling initiative, multi-million-dollar initiative, and it talks about the fact that important and trained military people have been pulled from criminal investigations to safeguard his houses, his kids. One official said, "I've never seen anything like this for one guy." Okay. Just saying. And then there was this. Tulsi Gabbard. She's another person who's supposed to be protecting us, right? She heads the Department of National Intelligence. She was busy yesterday pulling security clearances from 36 plus top-ranking U.S. intelligence officials, thus making them incapable of doing their jobs. What had they done? They had worked for Joe Biden. Understand, these are not political jobs. These are intelligence jobs. These are people who don't care who the damn president is. They care about keeping us safe. And she revoked the clearances as part of Trump's retribution and vengeance campaign for against any intelligence official who had anything to do with any of the investigations into his nefarious activities. Not that they did them of their own volition. They were assigned, right? They're employees. They were assigned. And because they were assigned to do that work, they now are essentially out of work. They may have been tasked to work on some investigations during his impeachments or into the Russian connection or any of that. And in yanking their security clearances, Gabbard said that they had failed to adhere to professional standards. Oh, yeah, right. As with this crowd, just assume the opposite. Any failure to adhere to professional standards is, of course, being done by Gabbard. And these were people who were doing what they had been told to do. They were doing their jobs. She accused them of politicizing. Again, it's always projection. It's always whatever they're accusing somebody else of is what they themselves are doing. And here's one I read that so befuddled me. See if you can help me here on this one. Okay, we know that Trump is using now Washington, D.C., and the poor people who happen to reside and call it home as a test case for the military occupation of America's cities by its own army. And since he announced the takeover, which was what, just last week? It seems like it's been longer to me. But a lot of stuff has happened, none of it good. And get this, the Justice Department has now instructed the federal prosecutors in D.C. not to seek felony charges against anyone carrying rifles or shotguns in D.C. Wait a minute. Okay, this is what I'm saying. Help me here. I thought the takeover was predicated on some, I know, non-existent uptick in violence there. Not that there isn't violence, but they're going after crime. It's why they need all these soldiers who, of course, are not about fighting crime. They're about fighting enemies. But never mind all of that. The fact of the matter is, if you're going to be fighting crime, why would you then tell the federal prosecutors in that jurisdiction that they are not to lodge felony charges against people that are carrying firearms or rifles? Help me here. I really am befuddled. They're doing what? A sop to the Second Amendment folks with that? But it doesn't jive with the... I am so mixed up. It says here the new policy was crafted by the Justice Department and marks a break with past practice. Well, what the hell doesn't anymore? You know, marks a break with past practice is one of those addenda to reporting now, like that we see all the time, because it's just a given. Whatever these guys are doing, it's not ever been done before, for good reason. But it is like, why bother saying it anymore? It is such a given, such as so-and-so refused to be identified for fear of retaliation or investigation or retribution or getting doxxed or out of fear, right? And the article it says this comes at an unexpected time. Yeah, just as the administration was ramping up federal law enforcement to unprecedented levels on the streets of D.C. Why? I'm serious. I cannot figure this one. My mind-boggling. And then because Trump promised not only to make everything better and safer, and the economy was going to boom and prices were going down and small business people would be in heaven, since the takeover in D.C., the restaurants, this article was just focused on restaurants as opposed to other small businesses. Restaurants have seen their profits, reservations, their money just go down the tubes. Reservations alone down 31% over last year, because who wants to go out to dinner? Who wants to go out for a nice dinner in what feels like a city and an area under military occupation? It just sort of, ruins the vibe. Business owners, it says, are concerned that the continued surge in law enforcement could heavily impact their revenue. Yeah, I get it. I can see it. So, those are just what, 4 stories that I read today that are centered on just one little area. Happens to be the nation's capital, but one little area, right, in which your tax dollars are being squandered. Hardworking federal employees are being mismanaged, tanked, misassigned, and we are on the losing end in every way. And then the only other thing, I think it's the only other thing I happen to see, and it might be a little old, I don't know, is that, again, in a sign of the pettiness, childishness of this administration and this president, Trump ordered President Obama's portrait moved. If you want to see President Obama's portrait now, you got to really go looking, and you got to go, I think, into some what's called a hidden stairwell. In other words, he won't be visible. And I mentioned that, this phrase that that this is not how things had been done before. This is in opposition to the norm, or something like that. There are pretty much sort of set places where presidents' portraits go, so that former presidents, there's a specific place where Joe Biden, the former president's portrait would go, and then the man who preceded him, and the man who preceded him, and so again, just sheer pettiness. It knows no bounds. Okay. I wanted to share with you another, I guess this is another thing about how the impact of what they're doing in D.C. You know, they're going after the homeless there. And there was an article, I think it might have been yesterday, in the Times about homeless people there are just being, you know, like you're a homeless person. You got nothing, and your life is hell, and then you get piled on. You know, if the government turns its attention on homeless people, a government doing its job would be trying to get them off the streets by providing them services, shelter, that kind of thing. But this is a government that is a kleptocracy, among other things. And they got no money to help homeless people. Homeless people are, to them, literally trash, to be swept off the streets. That many of these homeless people are veterans, served their country, doesn't matter. And there was just this one article about, there was one story about one guy. And he's been homeless for years and years. He's got a little tent. He's got a few possessions. And Trump's brown shirts took his tent, took everything he had, and threw it into a dumpster. All he's got now is his dog. And they got nothing. Did I mention this guy is in a wheelchair? And he said to a reporter, "Why is he doing this?" It's a good question. Easily answered. Because he revels in cruelty. And then there was another story that touched me so and angered me. But it's another story of another human caught up in this retribution, cruel administration's actions. You remember Springfield, Ohio? That name? Springfield, Ohio was the town that Trump, before he got reelected, famously said that the Haitian immigrants there were eating people's pets. Remember? They're eating the cats and dogs, he said. As with pretty much everything he says, there was no basis in fact for it. The only reason for him saying it was to, of course, demonize immigrants and demonize black people. And these were people who were in Springfield, Ohio, legally. They'd been brought in under a specific program. One of those people was a man who, in Haiti, had actually been living well for somebody in Haiti. His name is Wilford Rinville. And he worked for a cell phone company there. His wife was a nurse. They had a middle-class existence in Haiti. He owned a home. He owned a car. As much as you can have a good life in Haiti, he did. But then the gang violence there got out of control. And he and his wife desperately tried to get out. And in their desperation, they split up. She ended up being able to get into Canada. He ended up getting to the United States. Where he ended up in Springfield, Ohio. Now, this man who had had a white-collar job, when he got to Springfield, he took any job he could get. And the job he could get was blue-collar, and it was, it was hard labor, working in I don't know, where I'm trying to remember, some kind of a car thing where McGregor Metal Company. He'd go to work at 5 in the morning. He'd work until 3:30, and then he delivered food for Uber Eats and DoorDash. He slept 4 hours a night and then started up and did it all again. His boss at McGregor Metals said he had perfect attendance. He always had a smile on his face. You'd kill to have employees like this. And he kept saving up his money and hoping to be able to get himself in a position where he could get his wife back. And she's working her tail off up in Canada. These are the kinds of Haitians that were in Springfield, supposedly eating the cats and dogs. They went to church with other folks in Springfield. They began buying homes. Their children were going to school. And they lifted the economy of that town. Truly lifted it. The Ohio governor, a Republican, acknowledged it. And because of all of those Haitians, up to 10,000 Haitians went into Springfield, and the city's economy rebounded. And then Donald Trump was reelected. And he ended the program that had brought those Haitians to Springfield and allowed them to be here legally and to work and contribute to our economy. And now employers in Springfield are having to let go of these Haitians. They no longer have legal status. This particular man sold his home, sold his car, left the job. His employer extremely unhappy about losing him, and took the $50,000 he had saved and went to Canada. A friend drove him to the Columbus airport. He landed in Toronto. The Canadian immigration officer asked him a few questions and then welcomed him to Canada. Within days, he had what in Canada is the Social Security card, and he was looking for work in Montreal and reunited with his wife. This is a wonderful family that could have been an American family. And they're just one of thousands and thousands and thousands of people that we are throwing out. This article said that across the city of Springfield, there are disquieting signals that there are simply not enough workers to sustain economic growth. Home sales have stalled. Rentals are no longer in demand. The Haitians are leaving, and the city's going down. But I guess the dogs and the cats don't have to worry anymore. Margaret just said she was watching the show on YouTube on her TV. It was buzzing. She said, I went to my phone and it ain't buzzing. Jesus. I'm sorry, I just saw some. I'm sorry, that was a reaction to something else I saw. Never mind. Never mind. Here's something I saw. Remember when you were in school and there was a map of the world? And when you think of those maps, does this name ring a bell? Mercatur? It did for me. I hadn't heard it in a million years, but it was a Mercatur map of the world. That was the one that we all grew up with and still is the map. When they show a flattened out map of the world, you know, with on the left North America and South America, right, and then everything else off to the right. That map of the world dates back to the 16th century, to a German map maker named Mercatur. And that was and has been and still is the go-to map that, you know, hangs on walls all over schools all over the world. But I found something out about the Mercatur map today. It's full of shit. The map, as we learned to envision this world, the map is not true in terms of the land mass's size. Again, this is from the 16th century. It's not as if they had the capacity to have like a satellite view or anything. And so this map, that old, is still the one that is giving us the sense of what the world looks like, what the continents look like. And here's the thing. In many of the Mercatur map projections, I've always been astonished by the size of Greenland. I have. It's way out of whack on the Mercatur map. way out of whack. In fact, in some Mercatur maps, Greenland appears as large as Africa. I got news for you. It ain't anywhere near as large as Africa. And on all of the Mercatur maps, Africa is nowhere near as large as it really is. Africa, in reality, is much larger than Europe. In fact, it's 3 times, pretty much, the size of Europe. But it won't surprise you that the fact that Mercatur map is from Europe, a German did it. Europe looks to be as large or perhaps larger than Africa. A real map would show Africa in its true size, taking up a whole lot more of the map, Europe taking up a whole lot less, Greenland really reduced, South America would increase. I mean, the map is flat out wrong. And because when you look at a map your entire life, your perceptions are formed by that, and wrongly informed. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that the African Union, which is, a group representing the 55 nations in Africa, have now gotten behind a campaign to get the Mercatur map kicked into the history books where it belongs. And given that it is 2025, it's the 21st century, not the 16th, to create an accurate map, and there is in fact one, it's called the Equal Earth Projection, and to have that map as the map. Because maps have power. They shape how we see the world. And it's really, when you look at the true projection, man, North America ain't as big. Greenland gets seriously shrunk. Africa's larger. Asia ain't as huge as it is, and it is. And South America's larger. So Australia looks about the same. A little bit bigger. So, I mean, who knew? I did not know. And when I first, when I went to college, I've often said I was just blown away by how it seemed like almost in every class, whether it be a history class, a geography class, a whatever class, other than like math, I was learning that whatever it was I'd been taught wasn't really correct. I mean, obviously, I don't mean to diss my entire education, but I mean a lot, especially when it came to history. And speaking of that, this stuff with the Smithsonian and the other museums is so unbelievably it's just, hello, red flag, that we're living now in an autocracy. This is the kind of shit when, you'd think of those poor Russians, those poor Soviets. Their books were, history books were full of crap. Their museums full of, stuff where everything was, the narratives were all wrong and skewed. And you'd feel, I remember really feeling for people living in places where that was the norm. But it's the norm now here. It's incredible. I don't know. How are they going to, he's upset because slavery is talked about in the African American Museum. Yeah. And he actually said something like, they make slavery, the museum makes slavery look like it was all bad. He said something like that. It's mind-boggling. But they're putting back Confederate statues with happy black people looking up to their white masters on big horses. And this is, it's just so horrific. And it is so clear what is at its heart. The American perennial inability to come to terms with its evil past. Every country's got evil pasts. Every nation did bad stuff. And the nations that are now moving forward are nations with the capacity to acknowledge their mistakes. And we had done that. We had been attempting to do that. And the people who are in power now, and I mean power, are going to stop it. They're going to rewrite our history. The slaves are going to be happy again. Before they get done with it, it'll turn out that black people in Africa were clamoring to get on board ships and be brought over to the United States. The Civil War, I know we're taught that we won it, the North, but that was a premature call, because the South, as you know, has never stopped fighting back. And now it's not even geographical, because there's a whole hunk of this country that truly just wants America to be filled with white people, white men in charge. And anyone who doesn't fit the bill needs to disappear. I don't know. So I guess the Smithsonian and the African American History Museum have been given like 120 days, and the clock's been ticking already, to bring their content in line with the racist vision. Simple as that. I don't know how the hell they can possibly do it. And speaking of museums, I saw that while I was in Wisconsin, there was a kerfuffle at the Carnegie, also caused by Republicans. Man, geez, guys, it had nothing to do with the exhibits. It had to do with our Republican Senator, David McCormick, who rented out the museum for a fundraising thing. And that was the problem. That ain't supposed to be what our museums are to be used for. And the Carnegie apparently allowed McCormick and this Republican PAC called Pennsylvania Rising, which wants to get our Democratic governor ousted and wants to retake control of both houses in Harrisburg. They allowed that group to have a fundraiser there. And that ain't supposed to happen. They have there's governance rules about it. And there are guidelines that are understandably meant to safeguard an institution like the Carnegie against any signs of politically partisan stuff. The head of the museum has said he was hoodwinked, essentially. He said that, I don't know how he thought it wasn't, but he didn't think, and he's quoted in the New York Times as saying, "I am so outraged by what occurred to us that I would be just as happy to say no more politicians, period." What happened was that a whole bunch of employees at the Carnegie really got pissed off. By the way, you couldn't get into this fancy schmancy event for less than $5,000. So employees wrote a letter to the trustees of the museum saying that this was an outrage. And yeah, the director has not a leg to stand on, nor it's over, done. I don't know. More than 60 employees signed an open letter that said that the guy who's so outraged had disregarded his staff's concerns beforehand. So he wasn't as blindsided as he says he was, that he had been told by staff, this ain't kosher, and he went ahead. So this turned into a pretty big story in the New York Times, which I find interesting. But in that, I learned something about the Carnegie that I did not know. And it said, I mean, I knew some of this, but it said, originally framed as a palace of culture by the tycoon Andrew Carnegie in 1895, the museum network includes the Carnegie Museum of Art, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, the Carnegie Science Center, and the Andy Warhol Museum. Now, I didn't know that, but then it says it is one of the largest cultural institutions in the country, with annual expenses above $70 million. Whoa! I had no idea that the Carnegie Museums constituted one of the largest cultural institutions in the country. And wow, all the more reason not to let them be tainted by people not following the rules. And speaking of not following the rules, have you heard about, there's a Republican congressman, I don't know where the hell, he's not from these parts, must be over middle or, oh no, I think Scranton area. His name is Rob Bresnahan, and he be a Republican. And he's new. He was just elected in this last election. And one of his big things that he told his the voters was he was going to end members of Congress trading on stocks using, information they had that nobody else had. And that was one of his big campaign issues. Rob Bresnahan. So guess what? Over the first several months of his first term, which he started in January, Rob Bresnahan became one of the most active stock traders in the entire Congress. I mean, the chutzpah, excuse the proper pronunciation, the chutzpah of this bastard. He campaigned saying, we've got to stop this. He gets in and goes bonkers. As of last week, he had made 626 stock trades since taking office. And the New York Times, looking at some of these trades, are saying he's clearly using information. In one of them, it was information from here in Allegheny County that had to do with UPMC, in which he sold off up to $250,000 of stock, or a bond, worth of a bond, that was in jeopardy. But he knew that because of his being in Congress. Then, after being like one of the biggest stock traders in Congress, he has the gall in May to introduce a bill in Congress to bar members of Congress from buying or selling stocks, as he continued not only to buy and sell stocks, but he actually, it's clear from the data that the volume of his stock trades increased. So it should come as no surprise to you that the Democrats have said, we are targeting this creep. We are targeting him big time. So they're hoping that the mayor of Scranton is a Democrat and that she will be challenging this creep. Whether or not that's enough to get him knocked off, how wouldn't that be enough? I don't get it. I don't get anything anymore. Anyway, just telling you in case you didn't know. Okay? And that be it for me. I'll be back tomorrow. And God help us all.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.